Hello and welcome to Navigating Thought Leadership. I'm Lucia Rahilly, Editorial Director at McKinsey Company, and your host for this series of live webinars sponsored by the Global Thought Leadership Institute at APQC. Quick note before we start, this series is designed to give you the opportunity to engage with some of the foremost leaders and practitioners in the field of thought leadership today. We have been holding these webinars on a monthly cadence, and you can see previously aired webinars on APQC's website, which is at apqc.org/GTLI. We would love for this session to be as interactive as possible. It's a cold, gray morning in New York City, and we need you to liven things up. We want to make this useful, and we invite you, please, send us your questions using the Zoom chat functionality, and we'll do our best to field as many of them as possible. I will monitor the Zoom chat. So today, Jeff Potter, Head of Advisory Insights at KPMG and one of the founding members of the advisory board at the Global Thought Leadership Institute. Jeff has spent, hey, welcome.
Hey.
Jeff has spent a couple of decades in professional services, mostly, I think, in client service. He's going to tell us more about that. And he has effectively helped to build the content shop at KPMG from the ground up, which is super interesting. We are really looking forward today to hearing more about both the challenges and the benefits that creating a thought leadership function within the kind of mature, large organization that KPMG is, what those challenges and benefits entail. So Jeff, welcome. Thanks for being together with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Before we start, we were just talking as in the lead up to this, I wanted to just first acknowledge the recent and very unexpected passing of a key member of your content shop at KPMG, Jim Ledbetter, who was quite a well-known business journalist. I myself knew him by reputation only, but like many of us, I was so saddened to hear this terrible news about him, and of course wanted to extend my condolences to you and to the team at KPMG.
Yeah, just family. It's heartbreaking. It's one of the things that we've had a really difficult month with it, but the team is thinking through ways that they can contribute. Right? And those of you who know Jim, he's an incredible person, one of the kindest, most thoughtful individuals, and man, he took care of his people. We spent a lot of time understanding what he did at Inc., what he did at Industry Standard, what he did, and a lot of his other roles, and to see the amount of people stand up and just want to make sure that he could be recognized for his contribution. Wow, he was loved, and he'll be missed dearly.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
He's
thanks.
such a big personality. He always seemed, there's a big figure in the field. So I can imagine if you worked closely with him, what a loss it would be.
Yeah. No.
Um, okay, so let's get rolling. Let's start with some context. So Jeff, tell us, you came to this field from a different starting point than, for example, EY's Liz Bolshaw, whom I spoke with last month, and came off the more traditional kind of journalism track. Tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to this kind of research-driven publishing.
Sure. I grew up in professional services. I've learned a lot about all aspects of what we do in a big four firm. I spent time in the accounting side of the house. I spent a lot of time in the consulting side of the house, and then I moved into the strategy consulting part of our business, where I spent a number of years serving clients. I was asked a couple years ago, a number of years ago, I guess, to come to this U.S. market from the Canadian firm to like build out our global strategy capability at KPMG. So I spent about 4 or 5 years building the infrastructure for that program, learning a lot more about how our business works, and how to actually stand up the necessary capabilities to make a global firm function. And that's been that was a really fun opportunity where I could build tech, I could do go-to-market stuff, I could do propositions and capabilities. But then started spending more time in researching content, trying to help us get our market position out there. Then I slightly started pivoting towards the capability that we've started to build. Our firm has always built content. Our teams have done a nice job building high quality material, marketing led by our marketing functions, led by communications functions, led by the business. But what we were lacking is an opportunity to bring it all together, to bring kind of the best practices from across the business together into one kind of working approach. We had an opportunity to drive deeper insights, put more research behind our content, build an editorial model that I think was so prominent at other places, that didn't exist within our four walls of our business. And I think what we've had is an opportunity to experiment, an opportunity to design a model that could scale over time, to achieve kind of a high level of productivity within our team. So, I took this on for the last 4 years. We kind of grew from covering our strategy capability to now covering our deal business, now supporting our entire advisory business. And the team is doing a wonderful job at taking on that challenge and continuing to grow our kind of role and scope in the firm.
That's amazing. So Jeff, did I just hear you say that it's only been 4 years since?
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. And how big are you now? How big is the central group?
Yeah, between our onshore and offshore teams, we're probably about 70 people, and it flexes based on how many people from the business are playing a role in our team.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Yeah.
So when you were on the client service side, did you use thought leadership? I mean, where did you see the potential there as a client service professional?
You have to remember that when you're a client service professional, you want to memorialize the work that you're doing, right? We had a smaller firm that I was with at one point. It was like a writing culture where you finished a gig, you'd write a memo, and then you use that and put that out in the marketplace. And it would have been like if I looked at those memos now. Wow. There's room for growth, let's just say, like, because you're just coming off the bench and you're just figuring out what are we going to do to kind of promote the thing that we just did, and what did we learn from it, and we were just building that culture. Yeah. So using it to help drive conversations, it was highly effective though. Like it was really effective. I remember coming off the team doing it one of those kind of 2-page or 3-pagers on a project we did, and had 4 meetings right after it with organizations that were similar in size, some of them bigger, wanted to know what we just did for that organization, wanting to get into the mix of what our methodology thoughts were around how we would approach it, and then wanting to actually engage us on doing some work in that space. And it was amazing, right? It was just like a straight up wrote the piece of paper, brought it to the next person, sold the deal. And it was highly effective. But how do you do that at scale? Like that's hard to do at scale. That's
It's
easy
hard
to
to
do
scale
when
content.
when it's my reputation and my story. I could tell that story really well. Now, how do I get someone else to be able to tell the story of the firm, right? And you're trying to put some of these big pieces out that are trying to set the tone for what we think on a topic or an area.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge.
So let's get into that question of how do you do that at scale? You presumably started small. You were super connected to the strategy for the business, as you said, because that was your lead up experience. How did you go about, first off, kind of selling thought leadership within the culture of KPMG? Was it open to developing a thought leadership function, or how did tell us more about the origin story there?
Yeah, it was. I think that the business, because it was growing its capability, was very open to ideas for how we can bring research and perspective and insights to market. We've always wanted to be an insights to market kind of business where everyone understands that we're not bringing just time and materials, we're bringing real perspectives on the topics, and our people have them. What we needed to do is develop models and programs that helped collect those perspectives and ideas and start building a real funnel of things that we can get kind of better quality ideas shaped from idea to execution, and it helped kind of create some momentum behind it and start showing the difference that it can make when we do it well. And so we had to very much take a pause, be reflective approach on as we were scaling and building out our capabilities. How do we get the most out of the things that we're saying in the marketplace, and how do we build better capabilities to make them just to take it up a level? And once he showed it, start showing the progress, start showing the value, then people are going, oh, there's a quality value that we're creating. I remember early days submitting everything to Fiona's team and saying, hey, how do you think about this paper? What do you think about this paper? What do you think about this paper? And just getting it scored so people can just start seeing that we're actually improving their position on their scoring. It was a really helpful stage early on for us to create legitimacy around the value drivers that we were creating.
Mhm.
Um, and building that kind of external validation that we needed to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when folks used to ask me how we persuaded busy consultants to author pieces
Right.
at scale. I mean, my answer was always like they do it once or twice and they start seeing the value, and then they all want to do it. Like, and they all want to do it. It is remarkable how effective it can be when it's done well. So it
Yeah.
sounds like when you formed the function, you had some bottom-up demand for support. There was some publishing going on in a decentralized way. Is that right? So you had pieces that were coming up that you could use to model success with. How much
Yep.
did you have to do that was top-down as well? Like, how did you navigate that bottom-up, top-down
I
dynamic?
think I think that if you're looking at creating a thought leadership strategy for your organization, we were talking about this just before the call a little bit, you need to understand what the business strategy of the organization is that you're trying to align against.
Mhm.
At the core, if we don't understand where growth is coming from within our teams, within our groups, whether I'm in a bank, whether I'm in a law firm, whether I'm driving it for consulting, whether I'm driving it for any B2B or even B2C, frankly, I don't know if I'm indexing my effort to the things that are going to make a difference.
Mhm.
Number two is like, now I need to go figure out, now that I understand where we're going and what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it, are we as an organization pointed in the right direction to actually capture opportunity and market share
Mhm.
and frankly grow? And if I'm not pointing in the right direction, what is it that we need to be doing to adjust our behavior, our model, our offer, our perspectives, like our perception, if you will, for us to move into the awareness and consideration category?
Mhm. Mhm.
So learning and studying and researching, putting the work in the same way we would do for our clients,
Yeah.
right? Um, and that allows you then to kind of figure out then kind of how do you go top down into the actual plan that you're going to create, because there's going to be some things you want to do top down, but you don't want to shut down the bottoms up, right?
Right.
Then
Right.
you stifle the creativity. You don't want to do that.
Right.
So we then developed a combination of top down strategies and bottoms up capabilities to start growing our point of views, building more robust storylines, connecting the dots between strategy and the individual things that are going in the market.
Okay, so I want to get into a little bit more detail about your content strategy and how it dovetails with your broader growth strategy. However, before we do, let's just put a little bit of a finer point on grappling with leadership. Was your leadership fully supportive of this move to create and then scale a thought leadership function? Or did you have to grapple with proving value and proving ROI? How much did you have to make the case for this?
I think that in any organization of this size, there's a lot of leaders, right? And as we all know, they change frequently too. And like that's not anything new, but I would say as trying to build an organization in an organization and trying to build a capability that may not necessarily have always been there, you have to justify why you're doing it every single day. Like you need to sell every single day. You need to be always in the front saying, showing the good work that's being done. And listen, I learned through that process of when I've been two heads down and doing the stuff and not heads up or showing the story, telling the story, how that impacts kind of your next round of funding or how it impacts the next round of awareness or whether you got that cultural buy-in that you need in. It's one of those challenges that we as individuals, when you're trying to build anything within a big organization, that you constantly have to be selling. I would say that once you take your foot off the gas in that department, if you're not constantly trying to work that awareness and work that positioning, you're going to be finding yourself in a tougher spot. So it has to be a high level priority, but it's very easy to get sucked into the work and sucked into the ideas that you're creating, sucked into the strategy that you're building. So as people are trying to create organizations in this, don't forget, 25% of your time needs to be out there showing and waving the flag and getting everybody recognized for all the great work that they're doing, so that you can continue to go on your journey.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so vital.
Mm,
And you are a thought leadership function for KPMG US.
advisor.
Is there a global aspiration or no, because of the way the structure of the firm is set up?
We're always working on models, working with our business to say, how does our firm continue to create trust in the marketplace, and can we establish a core capability and a centralized function that allows us to do that. I mean, whether it's coming from us or whether the firm goes down that path, it's not decided if we go there. But I think those are questions that we're raising, so we can encourage people to kind of think a bit bigger about what we're trying to do. And I'd say that it doesn't exist today in the same way, or it sits within our marketing capability at the global level. And we work really hand in glove with them when we support those assets as well. So our team has supported some of our global content. It starts to support some of our local content. It supports some of our sector content. It supports kind of the business as a whole,
Mhm. Mhm.
in different ways, shapes, and forms. But priority for us is our biggest priority is our U.S. advisor business.
Yeah, I mean, I asked in part because it can be so challenging. We're staffed to support global practices, but there's also content that originates in the regions. And obviously, once folks in the regions see how effective the global content is, they want to do regional cuts and so forth. So you do get pulled into regional publishing, etc. So it can be challenging to scale at that level to meet all this demand. Um, but and regional content in our experience has there are different dissemination forms, right? Like in some markets, op-eds are going to be much more effective with reaching target audiences than big pieces on our website and so forth. So it's interesting, that sort of global local challenge.
We've seen a lot of our markets adopt content that we've created locally too, right? So they
Yeah.
would say, "Hey, listen, we like this piece of work that you did on transactions. Can we use
Mhm.
it in Singapore? Can we use it in Japan? Can we use it in?" And that happens all the time, where we see content that's being built and being leveraged across the firm network. And unlike your guys' modeling, where you're more kind of globally integrated, ours are all federated, and so we have some of that kind of
Great.
structural limitation, structural challenge when doing that. So I think our business, we would support some of the global content, but that's like the big G global kind of content, but not all of the firm context. I think they all do it on thinking most part. They're all working together in terms of like a content plan and strategy, but but I'd say that there's a lot of differences there that we're not tackling at this point.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Question in the chat, that's really an audience question, actually. What's the scope we're talking about? What are the industries KPMG is in, industries that your clients are in? Speak to that question for us.
I think you could appreciate that in an advisory business of a big four firm, we have probably 11 big sectors and that we deal with. Everything from like our products areas, whether it be consumer retail through to energy, natural resources, through to IM, we have healthcare, we have life sciences, we have government, we kind of have everything. And I would say our client mix depends because we provide strategy advice all the way to functional execution. And so depending on our material, we have to study really actively, our buyers, understand the target message who we're really trying to reach with the specific assets that we're creating. So we can all ground ourselves effectively against that message, and the right message there. So I'd say we cover it all, and we're trying to build capabilities to get even more specialized to drive that value.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay, so we can get more into the sort of who, what, where
sure.
of your strategy, but do you want to say anything at a high level about your content strategy more specifically and how it might have evolved over the past 4 years? So you started like just post-pandemic, like right in the throes of the pandemic, that puts you,
Correct.
right? So everything was changing then. Um, what, say more about your strategy and how it has evolved during this time.
Yeah, I think that we moved from what I would classify as a series of functional assets that we used to create and pieces that happen across our firm, which could
Mm-hmm.
sometimes come across because it's not necessarily being brought together as there's a lot of small stories. I think that we as a group have, with collaboration across our business, right, have tried to drive a greater focus on major thematic kind of drive like thrusts. And so I think strategically being bigger on fewer topics, being more amplifying our message around fewer bigger topics is an important approach and strategy for folks. Um, Especially when you're trying to target a specific customer, right? You want to be saying the same thing so it's integrated, feels like it's connected, feels like it's reinforced, and it breaks through. For us, that's what our goal was to kind of move ourselves in that direction over the course of the last few years, and that's been something that's been, I think, working well for us in various pockets. Yeah, so that's been the kind of the biggest move, I'd say. Now we're building more sector stuff probably in the midst of that alongside of it, but thematic storylines can carry the weight of the message in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Particularly with the attention fatigue that's everywhere, the content landscape has become so saturated that a
Mm-hmm.
bigger, better strategy, I think, is one that we're all thinking about. Um, what, in your view, makes a piece of thought leadership successful in the KPMG context? I mean, you said a little bit about like you write these memos and they sold business, etc.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How do you
Everybody
assess
likes to
the
see.
value of your program, like programmatically?
Yeah, everyone wants to see a piece of work come out of the back end of the studies, right? Like everyone, that's like
Holy
that's what
Grail.
the holy
Yeah.
grail, right? Like everybody wants to see. You never really know as well, whether how much a piece really influenced the sales market, right? Like you don't really. Number one reason why this project sells is never the thought piece. It's always a supplemental part of it. It's always contributing a part of it. There are sort of stories where I've heard partners come and say, "Yeah, I sold a piece because of the thought leadership piece," and I was like, "Can you please go tell everybody else that happened so that we can, and, ask for more money next year to get this thing, off the ground."
Right.
Um, but I would say that success means people are using it, that people agree, like people are aligned with it, they support it, they go, "Wow, that was good." The partners of our business, for us to make these things work, have to adopt the content. And so, if we feel like the piece of content is being adopted, for us, we think that's a win because that means they're taking it into conversations, they're taking it to clients, and hopefully it's moving the needle for them. I recognize that's not an ROI metric. I mean, we can look at I think as a group, we can look at like whether we have great operational metrics. I think we can look at whether we have good marketing metrics. I think we can have, but that outbound, how our partner used this material is really what's going to drive kind of value, I believe, and for our business, anyways.
Yeah. And did you say, I'm sorry, that how important to you is reach? Are you measuring,
Yeah, we have all the
visits,
inbound,
etc.?
all
Yeah.
the inbound stats and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
reach is also partly a product of spend, right?
Hmm.
And so we have to think about that balance, and that's not necessarily in the scope of what we do. My team that's focused on what marketing drives, and for our organization, we want to create content that will reach, that will meet the kind of demands for that activation.
Hmm.
But we do think about um, in my priority list, like how do our partners use this is kind of closer to my priority.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's challenging. We try to be systematic about collecting data from partners who use these pieces, like what, how many give us an example of an engagement or a conversation that resulted from this and so forth. But it can be difficult to quantify because, as you said, it's part of like a larger relationship building strategy. So,
Yeah. I
um,
mean, we can always take like the lead data and say how did the lead data translate to opportunities and
yeah.
calls, like, but that's just going to give you the basis, like the basic level. Like if I was to think about like the session that we are having in February, right, which is our symposium that we're having with GTLI and Cindy and Anthony are going to be launching their book, which is going to talk about value of like the quantification around thought leadership value and helping us all calculate our ROIs more effectively. I'm going to be using that calculation all day, every day to kind of continue to drive the budget allocation. But using the data that we have to justify that buyers and leaders are using content, they're making decisions on content, and there's an ROI of north of 150% that we think exists for most thought leadership campaigns. Like those are the types of things that I'm using at the high level to kind of tell our story. And then I'm showing them the quality, showing them the operating metrics, showing them the buy-in at the detail level. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a question in the chat. I'm not sure whether you saw it or not, but someone actually asked about Cindy and Anthony's book. And it might be a moment just to reiterate that we are the Global Thought Leadership Institute, sponsored by APQC, is having a convening in Houston in February. And we would encourage all to attend and bring your teams, etc. There's going to be a friends and family discount at the end of this related to the webinar, and that you'll be able to use to register. And Cindy and Anthony will be there launching their book. So it will be a really, I think it promises to be a great event. Okay, so we have some questions here about like siloing and so forth, and that's probably a good segue to more on how you've organized for success at KPMG.
Sure.
So let's start where thought leadership sits in the organizational structure. How does it dovetail with marketing, etc.?
Yeah, we have to work hand in glove with marketing and communicate in our communications capabilities, right? Those are major drivers, earned media, all of our execution, market execution. We have to spend our dollars very wisely, which means that we have to create content that fits the need. Like we are early stages in terms of our kind of growth story. And so building commercially relevant content is still kind of our highest priority. I don't think we have the luxury yet of saying, hey, we can demand a large budget to create something that would be interesting, but not necessarily commercial. We're not there. I would say within our organization, we sit kind of in the business. So we're part of the advisory function within our team. And so we have to be a partner, and we have to work across the matrix in order to make this thing work. And part of our growth and part of the things that we're trying to drive within our team is to make that work, that connection working better. So as we can see our team members come on board and stuff like that, is to facilitate even more effective partnering, more effective connecting to the business to make sure we're getting the most value out of our stuff.
And what do you think about the talent that you need? I mean, it's interesting because having built this function,
Yeah.
you've brought people in and you've had to train them up and acculturate them. And sometimes, you get someone straight off the journalism track who isn't necessarily accustomed to dealing with the kind of stakeholder management exigencies that we navigate within these professional services firms. So what have you learned about talent as you've built this function?
I mean, I think that it's really helpful coming from the business because for me, I can help translate
Yeah.
on a regular basis some of the questions and demands that we get on a regular basis. I tend to find, I think talent is always a big challenge in most organizations. We've been really fortunate to have really great people join our team and help us set up for our continued growth. We had people who understood, the structures of professional services firms. Some of them more so than others. And over the course of their time with us, we've continued to educate them in the model. Right. I think that getting talented, tech-enabled research folks that can help us drive our research thinking and help us enhance our story so that we're looking further, looking into unique places where we can create market opportunity for ourselves, requires you to get really talented, interested, curious minds into the model. And I think we've got a really, really wonderful team that does that as well. So, candidly, the people part of it, we've been blessed, and with the talent that we have, people who've come on board who've been successful in our team, bring kind of that grit, that perseverance, that hard work, but then also that drive to create something,
Yeah.
and to be part of something that's being created as well, which I think has been neat. We do run the challenge of always having to demonstrate that we're using technology to the greatest extent before we grow. Like we're not big and coming and then getting. I think a lot of our organizations are big and kind of having to figure out how to stay at size with technology. We kind of have to kind of go the other way around. So there's some challenges and headwinds of how do you stay on top of all those things while still
Mhm.
trying to handle the volume and growth that you're taking on.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Question here on bringing together groups that are used to working in silos. Was that a
Yes.
challenge as you as you were building this group?
Yeah, it always is, right? I think most of the time, as in client work, right? Like if you're serving clients in the business, half of the value that consultants often brought in early games projects was identifying who in the organization wasn't talking with one another,
Yeah.
who did the same thing or needed the same help or wanted to that had an idea but didn't tell the guy or the gal across the street that that was their idea, and the other person they didn't want to jam on it together. And so we're listening to these meetings, we're doing these interviews with people, and we're starting to see that there's so much more in common than there are differences, and that you can facilitate that connection point. You can start the business humming again.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different in our organization as well. There's so many people who want to do such great work that just don't have availability of mind share or
Yeah.
mind space to look across the aisle. We created editorial boards to help kind of facilitate some of those connections where we have blind spots to it. But again, coming from the business, seeing that connective tissue. I was fortunate to have worked in some of the tech consulting stuff at one point. I've had the opportunity to work in some of the people change management stuff. I've had the opportunity to work in the strategy business and in the restructuring businesses. Having been a floater, I've had to think about integrating um, as well. So bringing that mindset to the story and trying to figure out how we bring kind of that experience that we get about how we can connect dots between the business. I think that's where the value happens for a lot of the organization.
Mhm. Okay, related question here.
Yeah.
Um, Someone is saying that her organization has a mixed model and sometimes one side conflicts with the other, which can make messaging and positioning quite tricky. Any suggestions for navigating those kinds of conflicting priorities as someone who has come from these various, floated across these various parts of the organization?
You say mixed model. What do you mean by that? Sorry, what is that? What do you think that means?
I think it probably just means they have like it's not particularly centralized. So in our
Yeah.
context, I could give you an example. We serve oil and gas clients and we also
Sure.
have a sustainability practice. And those two practices
Okay.
now have
Okay.
come much closer together. But say 10 years ago, there was a lot there was a lot of challenge in navigating the differences in messaging among those two practices.
Yeah, in a model where you're decentralized, both messages end up making their way out, right?
Right.
Unless you have a really
Yes.
robust legal risk team, right? Like we're in a model where it's
Yeah.
fragmented, those things are just going. There's
Yeah.
there's commercial opportunities. I'd say that in a model where we are a bit more centralized, where we get that content, we can now say, hey, how does this message, what the firm stands for? How do we click it back to our values as an organization and decide what we're going to say and what we're not going to say?
Mhm.
I think having a view across the portfolio of assets that you're creating at any given time is going to help you better assess whether or not we're exposing ourselves to contradiction
Mhm.
and to risk. And
Yeah.
I think that as a group, we need to be thoughtful of that risk, for at the forefront. But we also need to think about, how does a contradiction make us sound in terms of establishing a trusted brand,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I think building a trusted brand, which we all know, thanks to Cindy and Anthony, creates premium for us as a firm, and allows us to get the golden days out there for our firms, so they can continue to grow and all that wonderful stuff. But if we don't kind of maintain that we don't hold the bar on the integrity of that, and as we're kind of being asked to gatekeep the wide range of material that we're producing, then we kind of lose out on the opportunity to make sure our message is heard properly and it builds trust.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that totally answers the question, but I do think that we need to invest in. That's the benefit of centralization if you do it right. Right.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it can be difficult to thread that needle when practices have different objectives or
Yeah,
but I agree with you. It's absolutely worthwhile.
I think your you probably have editorial boards in your model, right? It's
Yep.
the intention of those boards should be to help you navigate the challenges when those types of things come up, right? When you see something that doesn't smell right, how do you flag it? How do you get them involved? How do you, if you're having, because as you know, complicate people can get frustrated if their voices are being heard. How are
Right.
you leveraging those other senior partners and other senior leaders to work their magic with their other partner, their peers, to make sure that everyone's aligned on
Right.
what we're
And people are on the front line with clients too. People want to publish something because it's something that resonates very specifically with
that.
a challenge or an opportunity that their client is navigating. So I think there's also, sometimes on the editorial side, we lose sight of that and we are not as empathetic as we might be. I think you have to remind yourself like this person is on the front line.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
figuring out how to address that while at the same time getting the right message into the marketplace is vital. I want to talk about editorial boards because you mentioned that now a couple of times. We have them and I'm interested in how they work in your context. Ours work differently with different practices and so forth. So talk to us about your editorial boards. Do you recommend setting them up? Are they by practice? Is there one central one? How do they work?
Yeah, I think we have one editorial board
Mm-hmm.
now. And it's helping us. I recommend setting? Yes, you need to do that. Right, you have to find your way, whatever organization you're in. You need to find your way to broaden the the participation, but then also the advocacy of your organization. Right, whatever you're doing. Right, if you are working in a bank, and you can get people from different departments to participate in that editorial board to make sure that we're conveying content that solves kind of the comprehensive storyline of the bank, then you're going to have greater buy-in when you need to drive adoption into the business of that content, right? Because you now have a representation across the team. So
Mm-hmm.
it's always helpful to have people participating in the model that you're developing. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing is it's hard, right? Because now you've got more cooks in the kitchen, you've got more people sharing their perspectives, and the ideas are harder to form top down into the organization because there's so much divergence. So you have to facilitate that. So it just takes time, it takes effort, and it takes it requires effort not just from you, but from that board. And so being really clear and upfront, commitment, I think is really important to get the board humming in the right way, and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you're spending time effectively with those folks, so that you're getting the right level of understanding of what you're trying to accomplish is a thing I'd recommend for folks on the call. So I definitely you need it, both for the to manage some of the challenges, to connect the dots where it's not possible, to push back on things that are probably too niche, um, unless it's good niche, um, and to create opportunity for you as an individual to advocate for the work that you're doing. So you're not having to sell 100% of the time, you're only having to sell 25% of the time.
And so
So
what's the balance of editorial folks versus, for example, firm leadership or sector leadership? How do you think about the actual makeup of the board?
yeah, you have to look across, you have to get breadth.
Yep.
Yeah. So you have participants who
And then
represent visually. Yeah, this is breadth.
how about like how do you get them actually to participate on a practical basis? Do they weigh in on pieces of content regularly, or do you show them, is it sort of more like weigh in if you have anything to say here? Like how actively does the board engage?
Yeah, we need them to engage.
Yeah.
I'd say that that's part of the gig. We can do things to make it easier for them to engage, which I think we try to do, right? We summarize things, we bring it to light, we tell them the strategy, we give them the context necessary in a better way. But I think we need them to engage. Otherwise, it's not a control, right? it's not going to enable you in a certain ways. It's going to be a stamp, which we don't want. Right? We don't want a rubber stamp. It doesn't build, again, just trying to build the trust in the organization, what we're trying to do and take to market. We want to have a model that's trusted both in the firm and outside. Yeah. And so
Mhm.
getting that participation, getting that engagement is really important.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So if you were recommending to folks in the audience who do not have editorial boards, because I think many places do not, right? If you have a small shop, I'm not sure everyone has editorial boards.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think it wasn't until about 2 years ago that we started it. We had
Mhm.
informal editorial boards before that. But we
Right.
knew that as our scope became wider, it became more important for us to be able to drive that editorial board conversation. Like
Mhm.
we just need more input. We can't be masters of everything. We need SMEs with deep perspectives and subjects, both in industry and in topics and themes, to weigh in and to give us points of view. Someone who can call and say, "Hey, got this idea. Is it a good idea based on what you're seeing? Is it in demand in the market the way that you're thinking about it?
Mhm.
It's brand new." So like
Mhm.
that helps us make sure that we're moving the right direction. Also, they're seeing stuff at the line, right? They're seeing stuff at the front line of the business and seeing on a regular basis what their clients are talking about. So having those
Right.
folks actively participate in the conversation around strategy is giving us like an opportunity to better understand what's emerging in topics and such like.
Right. Right. They're really close to the client and close to the strategy. Um, and do you view them as specific to content, or do they also help you determine, what success looks like for thought leadership at KPMG in 2025, for example?
I think that we do engage them in content
Mm-hmm.
where we have where they're at the cross section of that content. Many of them, some of them might lead either an industry team or a theme.
Mm-hmm.
So they would be active participants in some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we bring the ideas for the strategy to the team. They weigh in, and I think that's an important thing to do with your organization. You're going to have business sponsors who are going to help you kind of get through the blocking and tackling of your org, which might be a different group than your editorial board. Should be a
Mm-hmm.
different group than your editorial board.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to think about how do you get that editorial board thinking about what's around the corner, and how do we help you get stuff through, and how do you remove some of the inertia when you're not getting the right degree of buy-in or participation of the business.
Mm-hmm.
How you help you unblock those paths. Um, and I think that you want that steering committee kind of thing to help you figure out how are you positioning what you're building in the right way,
Yeah.
operationally, organizationally. How are we working within the firm? How are we making sure we're getting the right value back to the firm, et cetera, et cetera. So
Mm-hmm.
two different kind of objectives. One's more operational, one's more content strategy related.
I agree. I could see, I mean, that's also how it works in our context. But I could see that in a smaller place or a place that has a less mature thought leadership function, maybe there could be some opportunistic using of an editorial board if there was less engagement on the operational side, etc.
Yeah.
Um, so, okay, talk to us about, as a consultant, as part of your advisory function within KPMG, presumably you've got a lot of upstream research moving through the pipeline so that your frontline consultants can talk to your audience about ideas, right? But
Sure.
tell us a little bit more about the research, your research philosophy, your research methodology at KPMG, and how that connects then downstream to your thought leadership.
I think I think we have to take a hypothesis-driven approach to most of the way that we think about our research, right?
Mhm.
And that's not news, all right? That's if we wanted to scan the world for everything, we can, and we can boil the ocean all we want. But we have major areas of focus, and I think that if we're going to identify the areas of focus for our firm where we want to be commercial, then we need to think about what research do we need to know, what questions do we need to answer in order to be successful in that. And there's two types of questions. There's questions around kind of direction, I'd say, and what are we doing? And then there's questions around what are we saying? And to understand what we're saying, is to understand what the thesis is of what we're trying to take to market, and figuring out what kind of research is needed in order for us to get there. Sometimes it's secondary. Sometimes it's going to be through a whole bunch of data sets. Sometimes it's going to use proprietary data. Sometimes we're going to go to the market and understand from the business, where are they doing these specific things with their cases, and figure out how we can pull those stories along. Sometimes it's primary. Sometimes we got to interview a bunch of execs. Sometimes we have to survey a bunch of folks. And I think that we are taking that kind of multidisciplinary approach to that story. And I'd say we are looking at it from a story by story basis, what's needed to drive that message, or theme by theme basis, what we want to be known for in those areas. Yeah. So it has to kick back to the strategy, right? Because those investments can be very large, as you are very well aware. And you can't always afford to have 100 of them a year. You have to find a way of having 15, and they have to move the needle. And so you have to be careful how you select those types of investments.
Yeah, for sure. And then you've got to think about, you've got the research that's coming through the pipeline that you're converting into thought leadership, but obviously content consumption preferences have changed significantly. I'm still floored by this idea that you started like mid-pandemic, in the throes of, you were like high pandemic when you started this organization, and that was in the middle of like massive digital uptick, right? We had lots of digital stuff going before that, but it was a harder sell to our frontline consultants. They sort of thought, well, what we need is the heft value of some substantive research that we can share with clients. And then if you want to do something like pretty on the website that is, works on mobile, that's good. You can do that afterward. But during the pandemic, everybody started reading digitally, and we just saw a massive difference in interest in like mobile friendly digital first content. So talk to us about how that's played out in your context, where are you changing the way that you think about storytelling? Have you become more heterogeneous? What are you doing there?
Our team specifically doesn't necessarily own all those channels, right? So figuring out how that how that reaches the people at the end of the day is definitely a conversation that is led by our marketing function within our team structurally. I think that focusing the content for us to be helpful has been a really important part of what we've been doing. When I say helpful, it's helpful to our target. And then finding a way for the business to create the respective assets necessary for us to get eyeballs back to the paper. I remember you on stage earlier this year, talking about how your long form still performs best. And that sticks really with me a little bit, to say that you need the depth somewhere in the mix. Where's the depth going to live? And so I think that we're trying to make sure that we don't lose the depth in this journey for the sake of just trying to get, leads. And we want to make sure that the depth is there. That's what's going to support the trust story for us. Like if I'm not building the right sophistication in the story that we're telling, I'm not being honest with the business from the lens of the business, then we're just producing stuff, right? And we don't need stuff. We need good stuff. So I think that we have to be like thinking about the multimodal, communication platform everywhere. How are we creating small things, big things, interesting data things, externally for better consumption, but also, frankly, for our people. How are we creating the right research assets that can be used by our people?
What do you mean? Say more about that.
You think about it, right? Like you've got your external market that you're worried about, like, is it a 2-minute piece? Is it a 5-minute piece? But also, what does the business need to actually bring that story to market? Have you thought about that recently? They don't necessarily need a video. Market needs a video, but they need data in a consumable way, right? They need to hear the story might be in a deck, depending on what we're doing, right? Like they need other types of assets in order to get it in the message and the story into market.
Yeah, say more about your channel strategy. I think it's interesting. I hadn't even thought about the possibility that you don't have sort of full access to your owned channel, what's your channel strategy like?
I think you need to think about, again, who's your target.
Mm-hmm.
I think our marketing team has a wonderful strategy for how they take that content through the various digital
Yeah.
channels and through various media channels and things like that to execute material. Our
Mm-hmm.
perspective is produce the best thing that we could do that's going to help us get into the market and actually be on point with a differentiated argument. And then we'll let that team kind of take the reins on how they're going to disseminate it. So what I like to see us do more things like podcasts and all that kind of stuff. We do some of it already, but could we do more? Yeah, I think we could. Could we do more digital experiences? I think we do that in certain pockets, and we're doing a great job with some of our great latest releases. But I think it's an opportunity still to kind of delve into. Now, how does that take our thought leadership to the next level? I think if it's helping drive a more quality story, right? If it's
Mm-hmm.
helping bring the story to life in a more dynamic way, then I love it. And we'd support it now, but it's just not in our wheelhouse to drive it.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation technology and the importance of technology and using it to maximize the
Yeah.
potential of your output. Obviously, we're all talking about Gen AI at every turn. How do you see Gen AI affecting your thought leadership at KPMG?
I think it's I think we are finding all different ways to use it, right? Um, I'd say it impacts kind of the work that you do in front of a piece. It impacts the work that you're doing while you're bringing your idea to bear. Or you're sparring with the AI to kind of have interesting conversations that provoke kind of new ideas and new interests. I think we see AI in our research, we see AI in the validation of what we're doing stages, and even in some of the drafting. I think you think that you have to find a way to build a more efficient offer in this market. We have to leverage the technology. There's no choice. There's no
Mhm.
going back. I'm not going to put the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
So now we have to figure out how do we do it in a way that drives quality, that ensures that what we're producing again is not just a book report that comes from the market from the internet, but actually produces new and interesting insight.
Yeah.
It's not the solve, right? It's a helper in this context, and how do we get the most out of it? So that's the. I mean, I'd rather in lots of ways we use regular AI to do a lot of the things that we need more RPA and some of in the way that we think about our research. We have to think about those tools to create efficiency so we can do more and put our people to their highest and best use.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we use Gen AI a lot now. We've advanced a lot. But I think it's uh it's so miraculous in certain regards, and then in other regards, you know, we use it for alt text, for example, and everything has to be reviewed because sometimes it will hallucinate and make up information about what's in a chart. So it's such an interesting kind of volatile and disruptive tool.
Yeah.
But you can see that it needs training. It definitely needs training. But it's happening fast. It'll be interesting to see what happens. So speaking of,
And it's
change,
changing, right? And
right?
it's changing.
I mean, so speaking of that, any predictions for thought leadership and what will be hot or not in either 2025 or in the next few years?
Yeah, I think the storyline around um, I think our organizations are going to be faced with the challenge of embracing the technologies that are available to us in a more material way. I think our organizations are going to have to find ways to create more insightful, more thought provoking, and more interesting perspectives in order to stand out amongst the noise of AI driven content.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think we're going to have to decide what quality means and what does quality look like in a different way as we go forward. And part of the group here, right? Like, as these are all these are peers, right? Like these are folks who are trying to answer that question. So we'll be on the forefront of putting out ideas and perspectives and points of view on what that might look like. And I think those perspectives are going to have to take shape. Um, I think that the complexity of some of the way that we bring information together is going to be a differentiating capability for us, because now it's going to help us bring in new insights. We're still going to be kind of that take that mindset, that even that journalistic mindset, going to dig in to figure out what is it that we're going to have to tell, what story we're going to have to tell, how are we going to get to that insight, how are we going to find it more compelling. I think there's going to be ways for us, to get more from the edge of leaders. So how do we get that information from the edge and incorporate it into our stories in a way that reinforces kind of the true direction of where businesses are going, and then what's the unique perspective that we have as leaders in our own right, seeing work that's being done across all these organizations around a topic or a capability or a theme, and how do we bring new perspectives to that. I think it's going to be harder to do, and I think it's going to be like that's going to be the hardest thing that we have to solve for in the next few years. Is how to stay loud on that. How do we come up and cut through the noise?
I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you see?
You, as you mentioned, you and I are both on this advisory board of
Yeah.
GTLI. You alluded to one of the things we do, which is try to figure out, what defines quality, etc. Tell us why GTLI is important to you and what impact you hope it will have.
Yeah, like when I joined, it's been about a year and a half since kind of starting to talk to folks more in our industry. Coming from where I came from, I don't have the same network of folks who've done this, right? Learning as we go, right? Learning from the people that we've been able to bring into the team, learning from what I can discover the market, learn from the model and the leaders who are in front of us. I'd say that this provides an opportunity for people, myself included, to really connect with folks who are going through some of the same things. And there's not usually 50 people, responsible for your thought leadership organization in your firm. So you're usually an audience of one or two, and you need to build a keep it like a group of folks around you who can start to learn more from and build better, build more from. Right. I think that's where we all start. We need to have our peers help us grow. And so I'm excited about growth. I've always been excited about growth. And for me, this represents not just an opportunity for personal development, but also, frankly, just a way to help kind of contribute back to some of that as well.
Fully agree. Okay, I'm mindful of time, but that's probably a good segue into folks who are interested in more upcoming events hosted by the Global Thought Leadership Institute, including future webinars in 2025. And most important, again, our first annual IRL convening this coming February 6th, 2025 in Houston, Texas. Get your friends and family discount there. Friend of a webinar for $150 off and join us. You can talk to a whole bunch of us. We've got a great agenda that's shaping up and we'd love to see you there. And Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and hopefully we see you guys in February in Houston.
Yeah, thanks to everyone in our audience. And please also follow the Global Thought Leadership Institute on LinkedIn. That's another great way to stay in touch. Have a great day or evening. See you in Houston and be well.
Thank you.